On this edition of In the Life.
The state of AIDS, the toll.
Dear friend Randall Fosbett.
The challenges.
What about lesbians?
The response. And the progress.
Yes, this is happening. I'm proof.
All up next on In the Life, America's information line on gay and lesbian issues and culture. In the Life is funded in part by the H. Van Ameringen Foundation. Additional support provided by Fred P. Hochberg and Tom Healy, Jeffrey B. Soroff, the Michael Palm Foundation, the New York Community Trust, the Imperial Court of New York, The Advocate, the National Gay and Lesbian News Magazine since 1967, and In the Life members nationwide.
Welcome to In the Life. I'm Katherine Linton. All across America, lesbians and gay men are challenging the traditional notion of family, coming together and creating communities through the arts, through an array of service organizations, even in unexpected places like gay rodeos. But as great as this coming together has been, one of the catalysts has in fact been a crisis, the AIDS crisis. That's why in this program, we'll examine the various ways in which people are reaching out and responding to AIDS. We begin in the nation's capital, where correspondent Hal German reports on the state of AIDS in 1996.
Rock Hudson, Eddie Peterson, Cindy Gerando.
Thornton Wells.
So many names, so many quilts. We may remember 1996 as the last year this mall could hold them all, but it also was a year of hope for some people still living with AIDS. Vancouver, Canada, the 11th International Conference on AIDS. No big breakthroughs, but a major advance in AIDS therapy, the so-called pharmaceutical cocktail, a mixture of drugs, old and new, that for some patients seems to work.
We are seeing incredible results in terms of these drugs bringing down the level of virus in the body and also keeping patients alive healthier and longer.
The therapy combines two older drugs like AZT or 3TC that prevent healthy cells from becoming infected with a new class of drugs called protease inhibitors that stop already infected cells from producing new HIV.
So the rationale is if we take both of those drugs in combination, both nucleoside analogs and protease inhibitors, you're basically blocking HIV production from two sides.
I can't describe the boost and the rush I got in the month after starting the protease inhibitors.
For John Hatchett, 1996 is ending a lot better than it began. Last December, hospitalized for bacterial meningitis and a reoccurrence of lymphoma, he began 6 months of intensive chemotherapy.
I was sick as a dog. I lost 15 pounds. I was on constant IV antibiotics for most of the holidays. And then in early January, probably related to the chemo, had severe anemia, collapsed here, did the whole ambulance back to the hospital trip. I stopped working, I resigned from my job. It really felt to me like I was entering some kind of last few years, last couple of years. I thought maybe 2 at the most.
Mentally, emotionally, you were preparing yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
In March, John developed cryptosporidiosis, which did not respond to treatment. He continued to go downhill. In May, with some skepticism, he began the new combination therapy.
Within 2.5 weeks after adding the protease, my cryptosporidium symptoms stopped completely. I mean, literally one day they were there, the next day they were gone. I could feel day to day an improvement in my strength, in my energy level. My sex drive started to come back.
In June, John Hatchett headed for Vancouver, the virus now undetectable in his blood. What was it like to be in Vancouver and hear all these encouraging medical reports and realize they were talking about you?
Indeed. There were several times when I wanted to jump up from my seat and, you know, you're right, yes, 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 this is happening. I'm proof, you know. Frankly, the only sort of damper on that was just knowing personally of people who were not having the kind of response I was.
Some people have such serious side effects that they can't take them, and others simply don't respond to the drugs in the way that one hopes.
They're difficult to use also. The one I'm on, for example, has to be taken on a particular schedule in relation to food, so you have to adjust your eating schedule around that.
And no one can say for sure how long the new drug therapies will work, or even if the clinical results tell the whole story.
We see that these cocktails bring down the level of virus in the blood dramatically, but we need to understand that only about 4% of the virus is actually in the blood. 96% of it is in the lymph nodes and is in the gut and is in the brain, which are major reservoirs for HIV.
Still, for many people with AIDS who would like to at least try protease inhibitors, there are more basic obstacles.
My particular price tag is $47,000 a year for my combination of triple dose sequinavir, AZT, 3TC, acyclovir, and my other non-HIV medications.
It costs tens of thousands of dollars a year to be on this, and most people simply cannot afford it. The other problem is access. Can people get it? And most of the people with HIV or AIDS cannot get these medicines, both in this country and around the world.
Some people in developing countries cannot even afford aspirin. In this country alone, because so many patients with HIV and AIDS do rely on things like AIDS drug assistance programs and Medicaid. Both of those programs that are available are still very iffy as to whether or not they do cover the protease inhibitors and whether or not they will cover all of these drugs in combination.
And more critically, we're finding a real strong groundswell of opposition on the part of some components within the HIV/AIDS community to making those drugs available to less privileged persons than themselves.
Jean Bergman of New York's Housing Works. Her clients come from the African American and Latino communities, HIV positive, homeless, living in poverty. Some have drug addictions or suffer mental illness. People for whom taking medication on a strict regimen can be even more difficult.
And the fear is that if the drugs aren't taken correctly, that new and mutant strains of HIV will develop, which will further endanger the health of people who are already infected and also potentially pose a public health hazard. And that's become an excuse for denying protease inhibitors to large segments of the community that is already affected by and infected with HIV.
Consider this prediction from the Harvard AIDS Institute. By the year 2000, more than half of all AIDS cases in the U.S. will be among African Americans.
Okay, so how have you been?
And AIDS is increasing most rapidly now among women. Yet clinical trial data on how women respond to the new drugs has been slow in coming.
Protease has done a lot for us, but it hasn't done anything to the classism, sexism, racism, homophobia that have been so much a part of AIDS since the beginning. And those are still our battles. They have to be. Otherwise, a purely medical, even a cure, is really not going to have meaning for most of the people with HIV in the world.
We are dead. To your door. We won't take it anymore.
Which brings us back to Washington, where during Quilt Weekend, hundreds of AIDS activists were confronting all these issues in different ways. A mock funeral at the White House.
Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that we've surrounded half of the building at this point.
A human chain around the Capitol to demand more leadership from elected officials.
More action now! They make money, we not!
A demonstration against pharmaceutical companies and their drug prices. And the candlelight vigil. A lot of anger, a lot of emotion, at least for this day. But where does AIDS activism go from here?
I think the big problem in much of AIDS activism right now is nobody knows where to focus. As treatment has changed, a lot of energy has gone in that direction, and yet the issues of access to treatment for so many people is really the key issue, and a lot of people are moving in that direction. And so there's unfortunately, a little scatteredness to the activist movement right now.
If you look at, say, ACT UP New York and find it smaller than it was a couple of years ago, it's because all those people have spread out to other agencies, other lobbying groups, and the work goes on in an activist way, but in different forms.
I see it getting savvier. I see people taking advantage of all the technology, the email, the internet, the stuff like that, trying to build better and stronger networks.
I think what we'll find is a lot more linkages between activism around HIV and other illnesses and disabilities with activism around race, and especially around poverty and welfare issues.
Price gouging pharmaceuticals are one of our targets. Needle exchange, pushing that is big, and prevention.
You know, in the long run, I'm going to be much better off. Respect yourself, protect yourself.
The prevention message is still very homogenized. It's still it's like glossy advertising. There is no urgency to it. People are getting infected still every day by the thousands.
And at year's end, a look ahead to 1997.
A realistic dream is that we have the president talking about this much more loudly and really helping the American people understand that there is still an emergency epidemic going on.
I'm afraid I think the future is pretty grim. I think that with the consequences of the Welfare Act gradually filtering down, what we'll see is an increase in poverty and homelessness, an increase in HIV infection rates, as well as in other public health problems.
For 1997, I would like to see that we can at least keep HIV a manageable infection, manageable in the sense of diabetes, where you are never really officially cured of the disease, but you can live your life as healthy as possible.
And for John Hatchett, there are dreams again.
One of my fondest fantasies of myself in a year is living in Italy with my lover, doing work similar to what I've done here. If I end up staying in New York, I see myself in a bigger apartment. That's it.
And so, 15 years into the epidemic, AIDS continues to haunt us, even as it inspires us with everyday examples of compassion and courage. But as hopes begin to rise for an ultimate cure, our greatest inspiration continues to come from those we have lost. For In the Life, I'm Hal German.
Even as activists and scientists, families and friends work to stop AIDS, the quilt remains a growing symbol of loss. Its sheer size and scope, over 22 football fields of fabric, can be overwhelming. And yet, when you look at each individual panel, you see that it was inspired by a single personal story. And it was that display of the enormous and the intimate that moved world-famous composer John Corigliano to memorialize his own friends lost to AIDS through his music in a composition called Of Rage and Remembrance.
Actually, the quilt was the inspiration for the symphony and, of course, Rage and Remembrance. You read these personal messages and you get very caught up in the individuals. And then as your eyes lift, you just see a sea of quilts. It's quite unlike anything else I know of. And I think I thought at that time that music has the ability to be enormous in that scale and then intimate with the turn of a phrase. A great symphony can be huge and encompass the world, and then a solo violin can come in and we feel the humanity of a single message. And that gave me the idea of the possibility of doing this in music.
John and I have been friends since college. We worked on many projects together, including The Ghosts of Versailles. And since I had written As Is, and he knew of my involvement with art about AIDS, he naturally came to me.
And I asked him to memorialize my friends and his friends with sentences about them, just like the quilt.
The result, a work called Of Rage and Remembrance. The following clips are from a new video set to the words and music.
I don't want it to be hopeless, but I want us to not forget. I think that my feeling about our friends, lost friends, is that when we remember them, they still live, and that to love them, we must remember them every day that we can.
As in the quilt, when you have an embossing on the fabric, when you have the threads on the fabric that spell out a message, that reminds me so much of the relationship of words and music. The words are coming against the fabric of sound.
Dear friend Randall Fosbett.
The rage, of course, comes from losing people. It's a powerless feeling, rage. It's when you can't do anything, whether it's Alzheimer's or cancer or AIDS. It really is the same thing. It's robbing someone from you, and you have no other way to react but to feel helpless, powerless, and rage is part of that.
This is the season of stone.
In AIDS, of course, there's more of rage. There's the rage of government inaction, of ignoring a problem that then spread way past what it should. So that rage is added to the rage of loss. These loved ones are with us in our memory, and the kind of eternal memory we can have by remembering them keeps them alive, that it's like the stars at night or the ocean waves that are eternal symbols. And this is a piece that will hopefully be obsolete in one way. That is, in years, we hope that AIDS will be a thing of the past.
Albert, Eugene, Olin, Michael.
During this weekend, an unending litany of the names of the dead rang out from podiums around the perimeter of the quilt. Many of those who read from the list also shared their own story of living with AIDS. One of the 2,000 people lending her voice is a fierce and brave woman, a lesbian, a woman of color, a mother of two, and so far a survivor on a mission to leave her mark.
We are here to remind our government that the AIDS community is not just panels in a quilt. The AIDS community is living, breathing, working, and voting Americans.
We bring you now a day in the life of Michelle Lopez.
Guys, what do you want for breakfast? Do you guys want waffles and eggs? Yeah. Okay. I get up at 6:30 in the morning, get myself something, probably drink some coffee or so, and then I get them up at 7. Gotta get them, brush their teeth, prepare breakfast, get them out the door. You ate the waffle? Take your vitamins after you eat. Mom, you ate the waffle. Huh? You ate the waffle?
Michelle found out she was HIV positive in 1991, and her 6-year-old daughter, Raven, was diagnosed in 1992. Her son, Rondell, is 9 years old. Michelle is not only raising 2 kids, She has used her AIDS diagnosis to speak out for women of color, for mothers, and for lesbians living with the disease.
My whole focus and activism is based, on women and children. So, at times I get out there in podiums and I'm talking about women's health, and then I get, I always talk about who I am because, I'm comfortable today, to say that I'm a lesbian living with AIDS. And then I got to deal with this, people asking, but how come you're a lesbian and how come you got infected, I really think it's unfair for a lesbian to have to explain why, she chose to go with men. I just think that is just so unfair. All right, so tell us if we'll see you soon. See you soon. Come, let's go. Raven knows that she's infected, but I gotta be honest, she does not identify with what society says about this disease. So she thinks it's something glorious, She would say to people, Mommy and me, guess what? We have a germ, and the two of us, our germ is called HIV. We're HIV positive. And she says it with a smile, because she just look at it. I think she looks at like some kind of special bond that me and her has. Rondell, on the other hand, he sees me, around doing, a lot of activism work. He has seen me in magazines, he's seen me on television. But then he sees the sides if I'm in the house and I'm not feeling well. If I goes into the hospital, if I'm not feeling well, or Raven goes into the hospital, or Raven's not feeling well, he goes crazy.
After walking the kids to school, Michelle gets herself ready for work.
Maintaining Raven's health care in mind. With Raven's, it's a lot easier because I make sure she gets to her doctor's appointment and she gets her meds. I'm going to be honest, I neglect myself a lot. And this is really the norm with a lot of women that I know who are HIV positive. We run around, we take care of the household, we take care of everyone else. But it's like our own health, it's like on the back burner. I really have to, be honest. If I don't take care of me, I'm not gonna be here to take care of Raven and everyone else in Rondell who I want to take care of. I actually began to be, get involved in the struggle and the fight for AIDS in '92, actually. This was when my daughter was diagnosed. So I actually started going down to ACT UP, New York. I gotta be honest, it was a group of Caucasian lesbians that was organizing this demonstration. So it was a bit of intimidation, but then it was actually part of, let me see how much of an effort they're really making to address all women's health, all women of, living with AIDS. So I asked the question, is there anyone here working on issues for women of color living with AIDS? And, what about lesbians? So I asked a question and got involved. This is the poster of the agency that I work for. It's a women's health organization, and believe it or not, this organization got funded in 1992 to do HIV primary care. It's a family planning organization, and when they got funded to do HIV primary care, I was the first client that they had. And at that time, I was actively using, I was homeless at the time, just, out there. We go back out into the community, we educate women about HIV prevention, risk reduction. I do safer sex workshops and, talking about, the issues surrounding women's health care. Oh my God. Am I gonna be able to walk? I gotta go to Central when I leave here.
I want to welcome everyone to Women's Center. The Women's Center has been in the community for 25 years.
At CFPC's Women's Center in the Bronx, Michelle has been working with Dr. Milano to expand healthcare services to lesbians.
Michelle Lopez. She's been a client, a co-worker.
In her work, Michelle talks about her own life as a way to help others.
My daughter's results, when it came back positive, as I said, it was actually my waking up call. And that's actually the time that I started looking at me as an individual, starting to address recovery. It was not until actually, and I'm going to be honest, 1993, that I actually identify a group of people who actually says, Michelle, it is okay. It is okay to be gay. It is okay to be who you are. You're living a productive life. You have come from a path where, your drug use and your past history has influenced what is going on with you today. But you are still somebody and you're still a human being, and that's what actually really made me decided then, well, I can go on with my life. So I can actually say I came out being comfortable with myself and my sexuality as a woman living with AIDS, but it took a diagnosis of HIV for me to actually pay attention to my life and start, dealing with, what I'm feeling within myself.
You ready?
Yep. Because she got the emma. And that area is nice and numb.
Before meeting Rondell at home for Halloween, Michelle takes Raven to the hospital for blood tests.
Okay? And you're gonna go home and be a nice pink Power Ranger? The challenges of, being a mother, living with AIDS, single parent, you have two choices. Either you're gonna get up and do something about it, fight, or you can do what some people conceive the norm as someone with AIDS. You get AIDS, you get diagnosed, you wither away, and you die. I choose to fight, and I choose to challenge this disease and do the best that I can to maintain myself and my kids and try to be a good mother. Is that a Ranger kiss?
There are many ways to tell the story of loss, struggle, and survival in the age of AIDS. One way is on the stage, and in just a minute, we'll take a look at the smash Broadway hit that has put AIDS front and center. But first, some scenes from two off-Broadway successes. One, a new hit musical that is tinged with sadness as the theater community lost one of its most creative artists. The show is called When Pigs Fly. Its creator, Howard Crabtree, died of AIDS before the play's opening and never got to read the critics' rave reviews. When Pigs Fly is an outrageous trip through the challenges of staging a campy, low-budget musical. Another runaway hit off-Broadway is Cowgirls, about a trio of classical musicians who are scheduled to play at a country western bar. It's the brainchild of composer, lyricist, playwright, and musician Mary Murfitt, who also happens to star in her own show.
Cowgirls is the only show that's written by, directed by, all the creative team is all women, and it's the only one in New York.
Murfitt wrote one of the main characters as a lesbian.
I decided to add the character. There were a couple friends of mine who said, "Oh, no, you can't have a lesbian." And I said, "Why not?" She goes, "It'll never be commercial. Never be commercial, not if you have a lesbian." I said, "Well, then it's too bad, because I'm gay, and I'm putting it in."
But the biggest hit of the theater season on any stage, anywhere, is a gritty musical that started in a small downtown theater and quickly moved up to the Great White Way. The show is Rent, and the story comes to us from a member of the energetic acting company, Darius DeHaas.
How can you connect in an age where strangers, landlords, lovers, your own blood cells betray?
It's an unlikely hit for the glittering commercial scene of Broadway. Half of the lead characters have AIDS, and the supporting ranks are mostly of the disenfranchised homeless and drug addicted. There are three main couples in the musical: one straight, one gay, and one lesbian. And with that backdrop, the show won the Tony Award for Best Musical and the Pulitzer Prize for Drama. Rent has defied all expectations. When it moved to Broadway from the New York Theater Workshop, it immediately became the hottest ticket in town. The enormous hype of Rent was fueled by the tragic and untimely death of the show's composer, Jonathan Larson.
Jonathan defined his family in light of his friendships and his friendships with people of color and queer people. Families are people who love each other and take care of each other, and I think it's clear that that's how this group of friends relate in the musical.
Rent is Larson's response to many in his community of friends who are HIV positive. One of his closest friends, Matt O'Grady.
It's a fantastic translation of a very positive outlook that you're living with, not dying from, disease, to quote, exactly what he says in La Vie Boheme.
To people living with, not dying from disease.
The main thing that I liked about it was that it was the real gay characters up there, gays and lesbians, singing the musical idiom of Broadway.
To fruits, to no absolutes, absolute, to choice, to the Village Voice.
Columnist Michael Musto of The Village Voice.
They were singing to each other as real people. They weren't cartoons, they weren't stereotypes. There was a lesbian couple singing to each other about their relationship. It wasn't idealized. They were having romantic troubles, and they were actually working it out in the context of a Broadway song, and it was just so liberating to me to see that up there.
That's it, the straw that breaks my back. I quit unless you take it back. What is it about them? Come in with them when
Open your door, I'll be your tenant. Don't got much baggage to lay at your feet, but sweet kisses I've got to spare.
This reached out to me because I've spent so much time in the East Village covering it, and it represented types that I deal with every day and night of my life, drag queens and lesbians, and just people that society has put on the fringes, but who have developed a certain emotional armor and strength as a result of that.
Anthony Rapp, who calls himself openly queer, plays Mark Cohen.
I think that if you're very closed-minded and you come in this play and it at all touches your heart, which I think you have to be pretty hard-hearted for it not to, you have to leave the theater somehow a little shaken up of your views of who can love each other.
When we gather on stage for the first act finale, the location is an East Village hangout called the Life Cafe. We invited some of the actors to the real Life Cafe on Avenue B. Where's Sherilyn? All right, y'all. What's up, man? What's up? Don't be giving me a hard time during this interview. So briefly tell us about your characters.
Okay, I play Tom Collins, who is a computer philosopher who basically has never fallen in love, and he meets this wonderful, beautiful man-woman child.
So with 1,000 sweet kisses, if you're cold and
I'll cover you. With 1,000 sweet kisses, I'll cover you.
And I am the one that changes his life. I am a street drummer, drag queen, kind of happy-go-lucky thing that is HIV positive and dying, actually has AIDS and is dying and would rather live with it than die with it.
Do you do any special work or preparation for these particular characters?
No, I mean, I know Joanne. The fact that we have a different thing insofar as how we act out our sexual orientation, it doesn't change the fact that she needs love, and that's what she goes after. That's certainly true for me.
What's my sin? Never quit. I follow through. I hate mess, but I love you. What to do with my impromptu baby? So be wise, 'cause this girl satisfies. You got a prize that don't compromise. You're one lucky baby.
That's what makes Rent work. People are like, how does this work? It's like, it works because it's universal.
525,600 minutes. How do you measure a year?
The story is so important, and the character is so much fun to do, and there's all these incredibly talented people surrounding you, and this glorious music supporting you.
This piece is not about one particular subject, it's about the grand scheme of it.
There are times when doing the show is it's like a prayer, especially because Jonathan's not here, and because I've lost friends myself, and to have the opportunity to visit that territory and in such a cathartic and healing way can be it's very, very special.
This is Quentin Crisp for In the Life.
Still to come on In the Life. A trip to Albuquerque for a look at cowgirls and cowboys as they compete at the gay rodeo. And a visit with an organization that knows when it comes to the fight against AIDS, pets are part of the picture too. But first. Challenging the traditional family isn't always easy. By choosing to be with who they love, another man or another woman, gay people are constantly pushing the envelope of social convention and, of course, sexuality. But now there's a growing activist movement that's pushing the envelope even further by going beyond sexuality and posing some very basic questions about gender. Correspondent Tanya Barfield reports.
I think it's two genders, man and woman.
No, there's a male and there's a female.
Oh yeah, I would think there are more than two genders. Male, female, and other.
Imagine always getting funny looks when you walk down the street, getting fired from your job just because you're making a change that makes other people uncomfortable. Or worse, being the target of violence, harassment, even death, just because you don't fit into the easy categories of he or she. That's the reality for people who call themselves transgendered, transsexuals, cross-dressers, anyone who doesn't fit into the easy categories of male and female. Now, just as gay people, people of color, and feminists have been fighting for their liberation, transgender activists are coming out to fight for theirs by telling the world who they are.
What transgender means to me is that you're a person that feels in your spirit, your mind, and your soul different than your physical anatomy, your biological anatomy.
Whether that be transsexual women and men, or masculine women and feminine men, or bearded women who allow their beards to grow, or women weightlifters who can't use the women's bathroom because they've been pumping iron. It can mean everyone who doesn't fit that Ozzie and Harriet paradigm of sex and gender.
Transgender is just a big old umbrella term that includes just about everyone I know.
Kate Bornstein and Leslie Feinberg have been explaining the term transgender for years, both as public speakers and as authors.
I would say that Transgender Warriors is the book that I've had to write my entire life, because every time someone said to me, I just don't get what you are, you know, well, maybe people don't have a right to beat you up or fire you or not hire you in the first place, but it's just not natural. Every time I sputtered, this was what I wanted to be saying, is that every single culture on this planet, every society, every continent, including the North Pole, has always had a range of gender expressions, but we haven't always been reviled and hunted and hated.
This just happens. It's part of the culture. It's always been part of the culture. We've been the part that's been swept under the carpet. And now we're coming out and we're saying, no more.
Don't push me, Mary. I am not in the mood.
It was at the Stonewall Rebellion, gay liberation shot heard round the world, where people who would today be considered transgender fought on the front lines.
These are currents of our community who have been visible, who had no closets to be in before there was a movement.
But while Stonewall is remembered as the turning point for gay liberation, the shot heard round the world for the transgender community was the murder of Brandon Teena.
Brandon Teena was born Teena Brandon and chose to live as a man in a small town in Nebraska.
After a minor infraction with the police, they printed Brandon's birth sex in the town paper. Soon after, he was kidnapped, raped, and later murdered.
People don't know the violence is going on, and they don't know the toll that it takes in shaping our lives. Every time someone shouts a slur at us, throws a beer can out the window, glares in anger and nudges their friends, that you live with the tension of knowing how quickly it can escalate into a life-threatening situation.
What people are beat up for is for being genderqueer. They notice a boy who's acting too Nelly, who could be straight, transgendered, or gay. They notice a woman who's acting too butch. They notice a trans person, they can't figure out what the hell they are. That's where the assault comes.
Ricky Ann Wilchins has been protesting transgender violence for years. Along with the group she founded, the Transsexual Menace, she's traveled far and wide demanding an end to gender oppression.
We took 100 trans and gender-friendly people up to Capitol Hill, and we spent 2 days lobbying. One of my favorite stories, I forget which senator it was meeting with a constituent from our group. He had never seen a constituent who came to him and said, I'm transgendered, I vote, I pay taxes, there's no reason why I should be subject to the kinds of hate crimes and discrimination that I have to suffer through.
Ricky is now the executive director of Gender PAC, a national progressive group committed to gender, affectional, and racial equality.
A civil rights movement at its heart is a selfish movement that says, you've got yours, I'm coming to get mine. A movement has a moral focus and a center when it says, it's not just about me, but I connect to everyone.
No one could agree with that statement more than Martine Rothblatt.
To me, the civil rights movement, the feminist movement, the gay and lesbian and transgender movements, all really are one and the same. These are all movements to respect people as individuals rather than as a body type that their genes determine for them.
Martine Rothblatt has in her life crossed many borders. Martine was formerly Martin, a Jewish man married to an African-American woman with 4 kids. The only thing that has changed in this picture is Martin's gender.
Bina, my spouse, when I talked to her about transitioning, I said sometimes that, you know, would you still love me if I did transition and live as a woman? And she always said, Martine, I love your soul. It doesn't matter to me, you know, what gender identity you wrap that soul in.
Before transitioning, Martine did a lot of research on how changing genders might affect their children, compiling it later into this book, The Apartheid of Sex.
I couldn't find a shred of evidence that transitioning one's gender was bad for their kids in any way. And in fact, what happened is I found myself harkening back to research I had done in college about the effect on children of interracial marriages. And people found that those kids grew up like great, brilliant, creative, beautiful, no problem.
At my house, really, we do a lot of things that normal families do, but we do like a couple other things just to keep us closer. And every Friday, as well as celebrating the Sabbath, we have a tradition that we sing a song and share what love means to us, and we just call the ceremony Love Night.
I think when people say you can't change your gender, that's like somebody saying you can't change your religion, you can't change your country. I've talked to people who say, wow, I've grown up in this small town and I would just never move out of a small town. Well, that's cool for them. But there are other people who are just from birth, or they develop a spark in themselves that they have to travel a journey in their life. And changing your gender is no more different, I think, than changing your religion or changing your country. It's like you're an immigrant, okay? You're a convert, you're a social explorer.
There's one tradition where girls are meant to be girls and boys are meant to be boys, and the myth of the macho man lives on. It's the American rodeo. But sure enough, when it comes to barrel racing and calf roping and bucking broncos, gays and lesbians are bucking tradition and creating their own community. We came here to Albuquerque, New Mexico for the International Gay Rodeo Association Finals of 1996, the culmination of a full year of tough regional competition. The regional winners have come to collect top titles and top money, while fans and volunteers have come here to get closer to the action. And everybody here has come to be part of a unique rodeo family where cowboys and cowgirls do what they love the way they love to do it.
I've been riding gay rodeos for the past 3 years. I've been rodeoing just as a male adult for probably the last 15 years. I really enjoy the gay circuit because of the camaraderie. We have a lot of friends from all over the country that we only see at gay rodeos.
Everybody helps everybody else. If you get in a bind, if somebody's horse goes down out here, somebody's going to make sure that they've got a horse to get in that arena and compete on.
I go to all of her rodeos, whether it's Sea Springs, Denver. We went to Montana. Pretty much all of them.
Wife's job's never done.
We met about 2 years ago in January at the Phoenix Gay Rodeo. I was running barrels and just happened to walk by and saw Sean kind of liked what I saw and went up and introduced ourselves to each other and hit it off. We have a couple acres and we board about 6 horses.
I'm the rodeo director for the 10th International Gay Rodeo Association Finals here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's the best contestants from the entire country, and so everything has to be perfect.
The tough rodeo competition inside the arena continues into the night in the form of a royalty contest, where people from all over the country compete for the titles of Ms., Mr., and Miss Gay Rodeo. The contestants compete in entertainment and fashion, but their most important attribute is their ability to raise money for charity.
Fundraising is the key to royalty. I've been out for 15 years as a gay man. I have lost over 60 friends to the HIV virus. This is what I thought I could do to give back to the community.
I'm from Enid, Oklahoma. It's a small town, and I've lost over almost 20 just in that area in Oklahoma City. So we do things to help others.
Over $1.5 million in the 10-year history of IGRA has been donated by local associations to local charities, which I think is a very impressive figure.
The folks at the Gay Rodeo Association have just been incredible to this organization over the last several years, and we're very grateful. New Mexico Aid Services is in its 11th year of operations, and one of the roles that New Mexico Aid Services plays in the Gay Rodeo Association is primarily through our prevention program. For example, this weekend we've got an education booth out at the rodeo, but we're also working with the public health department to do testing. Our organization has been a beneficiary for several years, and in particular, the Gay Rodeo Association has targeted our food bank.
Lee Laney, an animal rights activist, is the food bank coordinator. The fact that the food bank receives money from the rodeo is a source of conflict for him.
I do my very best to see that they get the best nutrition I can give them. Sometimes it bothers me that the money might be coming from an organization that I personally don't support or approve of. I don't think there's any excuse for harming an animal and using an animal in entertainment.
The reality is to say that rodeos, and particularly gay rodeos, are abusive is simply not true.
Tom puts a lot of his time and energy into the gay rodeo, and I put a lot of my time and energy into trying to stop rodeos and circuses and for other forms of animal abuse.
I think my animals are better treated than most people's kids.
Try to take care of both the rider and both the animal.
The last 10 years, we've only lost one person, and that was a bull rider. So it's not a whippy sport.
The rodeo may not be for everyone, but for some people, it's everything.
There's not many associations Ken and I can go to and sit down and hold hands and eat dinner together or show affection.
For the longest time, I denied my lifestyle, and now I see myself doing good, and a lot has to do with the fact that I got involved in the Rodeo Association.
We just have fun. We share. We become like sisters. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to explain because I mean you have to be involved in it to really understand it.
Ladies and gentlemen, your new Miss International Gay Rodeo Association for 1997, Miss C.
That's how we do our rodeo.
Throughout this edition of In the Life, we've seen many different people whose lives have been touched by AIDS, from cowgirls to composers to community activists. But for anyone living with AIDS, sometimes the most necessary contributions come in the form of basic necessities. Like food. Organizations like Project Open Hand in San Francisco and God's Love We Deliver in New York provide meals to the hungry and homebound with AIDS and their families. With over 2,600 dedicated volunteers and 59 full-time staff members, God's Love reaches more than 900 people with AIDS daily, providing 2 free, well-balanced meals. Then there's housing. The minority-run, community-based organization Housing Works provides housing for people with AIDS who are homeless. This facility, set to open in January 1997, will include a 36-unit residence for people with AIDS and a staff that will be available 24 hours a day for residents' case management and social services. Another organization that has grown out of the recognition of a basic need is POWARS, or Pet Owners with AIDS Resource Service. This is an organization of volunteers that recognize that the war against AIDS is not being waged by people alone. Pets are part of the picture too, and sometimes lend a welcome hand, or in this case, paw.
The idea behind the organization actually is predicated on the same principles that pet-facilitated therapy programs are, which is that animals play a very positive role in the lives of human beings, and a positive emotional outlook in turn has a strong effect on stability of health.
A non-profit organization, POWARS has about 400 volunteers on its roster, serving approximately 350 clients. Victor Matatia is one of them.
I have 3 pets. This is Bobby, and he is my Maltese, and Bobby is 3 years old. I'm on Social Security, which is very, very limited. I could barely afford to feed myself. In fact, I can't afford to feed myself. I have things like God's Love, which supplement me. I needed a group like POWARS to help supplement my pets. POWARS will provide dog walkings for me as needed if I'm unable to walk the dog, if due to weather, or if I need just help if I'm not balanced that day.
Jennifer Allen, a guidance counselor and dog lover, volunteers for POWARS, providing much-needed deliveries.
Well, I'm starting with this aspect of the volunteer work because I have a car, and that's something that they value a lot.
When we make the deliveries, we talk to the people who own the pets. We talk to the pets, which is always a great thing since I don't have any dogs with me right now.
One delivery Janet and Jennifer made that day was to the home of Robert Firth and his cat, Gandhi.
Gandhi was a stray, and he was found and picked up by a little organization. They found him down in Chinatown, and now he lives up on the Upper West Side. He's a great cat. I was diagnosed with HIV almost 5 years ago. Approximately about a year later, I fell into the full-blown AIDS category. A year and a half ago, I became sick. POWARS continued to make sure there was food here and do, stuff. And, if there's any problem, I know if there was any problem, I could just call them and they'd be there. He's become like my buddy. He keeps me sane. When I'm at home alone and sometimes your mind goes through crazy things, he's there for me and he keeps me stable.
The idea that somebody who's faced with a life-threatening situation, who is so emotionally attached to an animal, might have to give that animal up simply because they can't do 4 flights of stairs or afford the food, is not something I ever want to. I just want to eliminate that possibility.
So to have my animals here through the thick and the thin, and through not feeling well and sometimes screaming and yelling and having an animal come over and kiss me, makes all the difference. It makes me feel a lot better.
We leave you now with some very special footage of the late AIDS activist and artist Michael Callan, filmed while he recorded his last CD called Legacy. From all of us at In Life, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
But I'm not really gonna leave you. I'm not really It is your air I breathe. It's the record you set that makes me go on. It's your strength that helps me stand. You're not really gonna leave me.
In the Life is funded in part by the H. Van Ameringen Foundation. Additional support provided by Fred P. Hochberg and Tom Healy, Jeffrey B. Soroff, the Michael Palm Foundation, the New York Community Trust, the Imperial Court of New York, The Advocate, the National Gay and Lesbian News magazine since 1967, and In the Life members nationwide.